With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning on the AgNet News Hour. Coming up later, it's a slower month for nut shipments, but levels continue to outpace 2023. And farm workers are making $100 less per week after implementation of AB 1066. We'll have more on that. But our top story today. National Pork Producers Council released its latest economic impact report, featuring new data on the U.S. pork industry's contributions to the national economy.
It's an interesting report because we look not just at the farm level, but we estimate the impact that arises from purchasing inputs from other industries, and then the added value that comes from marketing those pigs at the packing and processing level.
NPPC economist Holly Cook.
So we used a variety of USDA data sources to kind of capture the 2023 production year in terms of the amount of hogs that were marketed and the value there. And so looking at over 127 hogs slaughtered, over 149 million marketed when we look at all different levels of production, and 27 billion in cash receipts at the farm level, translated into more than 570,000 jobs supported, 37 billion in personal incomes, and 62 billion in value added to the U.S. economy once we were able to account for all of those upstream and downstream impacts.
Cook says compared to the previous report year of 2021,
2023 was a very difficult year for pork producers, a lot of negative profit margins, by some accounts, one of the worst years that we've had ever. So certainly not surprising to see a little bit of a reduced impact there, just given those things, as well as an inflationary environment where the incomes that are earned in some of these industries maybe aren't going as far and generating more impacts, but still certainly a very resilient industry and still very significant numbers despite all of those challenges.
The 2022 USDA NASS Census of Agriculture shows that the number of farms raising hogs has declined, but the number of hogs per farm has increased. Both the dairy and poultry sectors are dealing with cases of highly pathogenic avian influenza. Chad Smith has the latest on how the virus is impacting markets.
The current outbreak of highly pathogenic avian influenza, which traces all the way back to 2022, is unusual, not only in the fact that it's infecting dairy cattle, but also that cases are continuing to be diagnosed in the warmer summer months. Barrett Nelson, an economist with the American Farm Bureau Federation, says even though the virus typically scales back in the summer, that's not the case this year.
Recently, we did have a few cases pop up in Colorado. We had 3.4 million birds affected in a couple of different egg production facilities. This was the largest outbreak so far in the U.S., concentrated in a single day. We have some good news on the dairy front. Things are slowing down just a little bit. As we went through June, that we started to see some days towards the end of June and getting through July where we had a couple of days where we didn't have any detections. Overall, we're up to about 172 total detections in dairy cattle.
Nelson says dairy markets haven't taken much of a hit, though.
We see a reduction in milk production anywhere from 20 to 30%. That's one of the symptoms. And so in the South especially, that dropped milk production around 2%. And at the same time, we saw demand kind of drop off to about 2%. So the prices and whatnot stayed about the same. Now, as things have gone on, detections in the South have slowed, production has ticked back up.
He says this will be a key storyline as we head into the fall.
The majority of turkey in the United States is consumed on Thanksgiving. And so if we look at the July livestock, dairy, poultry outlook the USDA puts out, May turkey production was down around close to 10% compared to last year. When we're looking at a 10% reduction and we're still seeing this kind of uptick in avian influenza, this may prove to be kind of a volatile market as we work our way closer to Thanksgiving.
Chad Smith, Washington.
The latest round of USDA Conservation Innovation Grants Awards continues a 2-decade effort to invest in conservation practices and trials of such innovations. Rod Bain reports.
Since its inception 2 decades ago, USDA's Conservation Innovation Grant Program has provided significant investment in new approaches and technologies in the natural resources conservation realm.
The Conservation Innovation Grants Program, it's a competitive program that NRCS offers to really support development of new tools, new approaches and practices, and up-and-coming technologies to really further our natural resource conservation on private lands.
Karen Woodrich of the Natural Resources Conservation Service says almost $542 million in investments have supported CIG projects nationwide since 2004. Projects developing innovative tools and approaches to conservation and addressing specific concerns such as changing climate.
The National CIG has two parts. One is our on-farm conservation innovation trials, and our other is our CIG, what we call Classic. Classic is used to develop new tools and technologies. Our on-farm trials are more about widespread adoption and evaluation of some of our innovative conservation approaches.
Recently, the latest round of CIG awards was announced.
We're investing $90 million in 53 conservation innovation grant projects, and more than 69.7 million of that is on-farm trials, and then the remaining 20 million is for those CIG Classic projects.
In terms of the focus within each category of conservation innovation grants for 2024,
our on-farm trials really focused on a couple of things: irrigation water management technologies, nutrient management, feed management, and enteric methane reduction. And our Classic CIGs are more of our traditional forestry habitat, energy economics kind of activities.
the end goals of CIG-funded projects, according to Woodrich.
We're looking for creative problem solving and innovation. So the CIG partners really look at addressing our water quality, water quantity, air quality, soil health, and wildlife habitat challenges. At the same time, trying to improve ag operations.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. In today's National Spotlight, getting into the later part of the crop season, the window to determine yields is opening up. Riley Smith reports.
Applying nutrients at critical times can maximize the potential of your crops. Mike Powell, Senior Brand Manager of Bioscience at Helena Products Group, said farmers should consider using Full Scale, a foliar biological that can help plants function at maximum productivity.
The window to determine crop yield this season is really opening up. As these crops start to shift from the vegetative growth to the reproductive stage, farmers have an opportunity to really tip the scales at harvest with the right foliar application. Once crops hit this reproductive stage, everything needs to be firing in all cylinders. And with a foliar application of Full Scale, which is a new product of ours, during the early to mid reproductive stage, we can really make a difference in making a good crop better.
Full Scale is a biological source of zinc, manganese, and molybdenum, 3 nutrients that help increase yields. Powell said the data shows that Full Scale sits above the grower standard.
We've had this product in the marketplace for around 6 years now. Our increases on corn have been an average of 7.5 bushel, soybeans at 4.1 bushel. We've been seeing 6 bushel increases in wheat, and for your southern growers in cotton country, we've been averaging around 91 pounds per acre over grower standard when they're using Full Scale. Full Scale basically is strengthening the crop's ability to move nutrients and sugars throughout the plant during pollination. This increase enables the crop to basically shift its valuable energy to yield production.
Powell said it specifically helps corn and soybean plants to have better kernel and pod fill, respectively.
This is an exclusive technology that further improves nutrient uptake. It also minimizes spray application problems and can enhance tank mix compatibility. So that basically allows Full Scale to easily fit into a mid-season pesticide application going out. So if a guy's putting out a fungicide or an insecticide on his corn or soybeans during that same time, he can mix this with no problem without having an extra trip across the field.
Powell said Full Scale also easily fits into a farmer's crop management plan.
Well, in soybeans, for example, we see an increase of nutrient flow during the reproductive stage, which basically benefits flowering and seed production. That increases the quantity, the size, and pod retention. So by meeting that demand at the right time, soybeans can hold more flowers, hold on more pods, and basically be more effective in filling them. That's really where we're seeing the difference in our yield increases. And then where we're getting a really nice bump in corn, we're seeing larger kernels, better tip fill, and higher test weights is where that 7.1 bushel increase is coming from.
For more information, visit helenaagri.com. That again was Mike Powell, Senior Brand Manager of Bioscience at Helena Products Group. I'm Riley Smith reporting from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network.
That's today's National Spotlight. Now here's the Livestock Report with John Harrith.
Malaysia has emerged as a promising destination for U.S. pork exports. In the past, Malaysia has maintained a cumbersome process for approving U.S. plants, but as U.S. Meat Export Federation Director of Export Services Jim Remchek explains, progress has been made in this area.
Malaysia had requested to come do a physical audit of 5 pork facilities. They wanted a selection of 5 facilities to physically audit, and then therefore, if all 5 pork plants passed the audit, any future pork plants wanting to be registered for Malaysia could do so via a paper application process and not have to post a physical audit in order to become registered. And then in early 2024, another facility attempted to get registered. We were just told on Monday that this approval came through. So we think that it's a harbinger of good things to come. FAS Kuala Lumpur also stated that now might be the right time to strike while the iron's hot and have more facilities submit applications. Ideally, we would love to have a systems-based approval for Malaysia, and we wouldn't have to take part in this facility registration scheme that they have. But we will take this win because we are facing a lot of headwinds in terms of facility registrations all over the world.
USMEF is also working to get more U.S. beef plants approved for Malaysia, but unfortunately this process is more difficult.
Because there's no halal aspect to the pork approvals, we are in a scenario in which we can do this paper process. When it comes to approving a beef facility, not only does the Malaysia Department of Veterinary Services need to be involved in a physical audit, their halal authority does as well. So that makes things a lot more complicated for beef.
For more, please visit usmef.org. For the U.S. Meat Export Federation, I'm John Harrith.
This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. We will be back in just a moment with more agriculture news. Coming up in a few moments, we'll have today's This Land of Ours report, but first, more of the day's agriculture news. And with a preview of what you'll hear today on AgNet West, here's Brian German.
Almond and pistachio shipments have remained strong throughout the year despite a decline in June. Blue Diamond's June market update showed that almond shipments met industry expectations with 206.2 million pounds shipped. Although a 9% decline from the previous month, it represents a 10.5% increase from June of last year. The overall year-to-date shipment increase stands at 5.7%, positioning the industry to potentially ship over 2.7 billion pounds by the end of the crop year, with a projected carryout of 485 million pounds. Similarly, pistachio shipments also followed a strong trend. Figures from the Administrative Committee for Pistachios shows that despite a 16% decrease in June compared to the same month last year, year-to-date shipments are up 35%, reaching over 1 billion pounds. A new AI-powered tool designed for agricultural professionals is now being made available for free online. Strativation Group has launched the AgriSearch Assistant as a resource to help users quickly find and use credible ag data from trusted sources like the USDA, ERS, NASS, and land-grant universities. The resource is meant to simplify the process of aggregating and accessing scattered data, making it easier to solve agricultural problems. The tool reportedly functions like an in-house research intern, providing thoughtful responses and citing reliable sources. Strativation Group aims to elevate the visibility of existing agricultural research and welcomes feedback to continually improve the tool. Available to all ChatGPT users, AgriSearch Assistant seeks to revolutionize data access for business leaders, researchers, educators, and other ag professionals. Lawmakers have introduced legislation aimed at reorganizing food safety oversight in the U.S. Senior Dick Durbin and Representative Rosa DeLauro have introduced the Federal Food Administration Act, aiming to create a new agency focused on food safety. This agency would be called the Federal Food Administration and would be established within the Department of Health and Human Services. The agency would take over food safety responsibilities from the FDA, which has struggled keeping up with food safety issues in previous years. The lawmakers believe a dedicated agency will better handle food safety and nutrition. The proposed agency will include existing FDA food programs and be led by a Senate-confirmed expert. Supporters of the bill, including Consumer Reports and other advocacy groups, emphasize the need for an agency solely focused on food safety to prevent contamination, recalls, and associated health risks. Farm workers appear to be taking home less money under the new overtime rules. Assistant Professor of Cooperative Extension in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics at UC Berkeley, Allie Hill explained what the data revealed through 2022 when AB 1066 was fully implemented for large employers.
So that means employers are required to pay overtime after 40 hours a week or 8 hours a day. So what I find is that if we compare that to the pre-period, what was happening in working hours, the average worker was working 5 fewer hours per week as an effect of the law. And associated with that, and actually this matches what you would expect given the average earnings of farm workers, that workers were earning about $100 less per week than they would have been without the law in place. And that $100 less per week actually does account for inflation. So in that particular study, I am adjusting all dollars with national inflation. So it's a pretty substantial income loss for workers.
The 2024 FIRA USA AgTech event is coming up in October at the Yolo County Fairgrounds. Senior Vice President of Innovation at Western Growers, Walt Duflock, said a major theme this year is the bottom line impact of robotics and automation.
You're going to see a day 3 panel that I'm really excited about because Western Growers has taken all of this to heart. And Ben Pallone, my colleague on the commercialization automation side, he's put together one of the best case studies we've ever seen on carbon robotics. And it really breaks down the economics of what did things look like with labor before they added the carbon robotics and what did it look like after. And so what you're going to see at FIRA USA 2024 is let's dive deep with one panel, talking with Ben about the carbon robotics math, but this panel is not going to be focused at all on the tech, the bits, the bytes, the lasers, the strength of the No, it's about the grower perspective and the grower economics.
I'm Brian German for AgNet West Radio Network.
We may benefit more from nature than previously thought. That's coming up on this end of ours. Trees and green spaces may do more for us than just helping clean the air we breathe and the water we drink. Gary Crawford reports.
In general, people who live in areas with trees and green space live healthier, happier lives than those who don't. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, very enthusiastic. Yes, from Michelle Kondo, a social scientist with the Forest Service. She says studies of millions of people around the world confirm
people live longer when they live in greener environments.
Could be an emotional or mental thing at work here. Michelle did a study lending weight to that theory.
We measured people's moods, emotions. We sort of tracked their location throughout their day, and they would receive little pop-up messages on their phones to answer our very brief survey about their mood or emotions.
And the results when people were near or around trees and such?
Positive emotions were improved and negative emotions decreased.
Michelle did another study showing people's heart rates slowing down when in or near trees and greenery, proving without going out on a limb that trees are good for us, right, Michelle?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. Planning on taking your dog with you on vacation? Gary Crawford has some tips from an expert on this edition of Agriculture USA.
For many of us, it's right about this time of year when we finally decide, I need a vacation. And maybe you're thinking about possibly bringing your dog with you on vacation for the first time ever this year. Lots of things to consider on that score, especially if it's the dog's first long-distance car trip. So coming up, it's Dogs on Vacation. On this edition of Agriculture USA, I'm Gary Crawford. Well, you've worked hard all year long, all summer long, but now the summer's almost over. School will be starting before we know it, so at last it's time to say, let's go on vacation. This year, maybe for the first time ever, we might be thinking about bringing the dog with us on vacation.
Well, you're talking to me about my favorite thing ever, Gary, which is like dogs and bringing them along.
And that's Dawn Fitzhugh. She's the veterinarian with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Fitzhugh's first piece of advice, start preparing the dog and yourself as soon as possible. 2 weeks ahead of the trip would be ideal. Start the process by taking the dog to the vet.
Just that trip alone, like how is that animal in that car, can give the person a really good sense of like, okay, do they like the car now? Do they hate the car now? And it's really good to talk to the vet about where you might be taking them to.
You can also talk to the vet about having your dog's vaccinations brought up to date, getting a copy of the dog's shot record to take with you on the trip. Also, talk to the vet about having the dog microchipped. However, on that score, make sure the dog also has a collar and a phone number on it.
If your dog happens to be loose and running and someone is able to catch them, it takes a while to be able to get to a microchip reader. But if you have a collar immediately available with your phone number, then they can get back in touch with you quickly.
Back to whether the dog can handle riding in the car, that's an important consideration. Many dogs get extremely anxious about riding in the car. Many have what looks like car sickness.
The good thing is nowadays there are some really nice medications that vets can prescribe to help with that kind of anxiety and help them get better settled into travel.
Some dogs don't like travel crates and carriers either, but Fitzhugh says a few days before the vacation's due to begin, leave the carrier out somewhere in the house.
Give them the opportunity to smell around that carrier, get comfortable being in it, possibly even feeding them in there and shutting the door while they're in there eating so that they're not seeing that carrier for the first time when you're about ready to take them in it is definitely a much better experience for you and for them.
That's for sure. So yes, with some dogs, it's sometimes a major project to even determine whether we should bring our beloved pets with us.
Deciding whether or not it is right for the pet for them to come along with you is just as important as do you want them to be with you?
That's right, because some dogs just do not tolerate travel very well or new surroundings. But once you and the vet agree that it would be okay to bring your dog with you, you can then be gathering things together to take with you on that trip, bearing in mind,
animals live through their noses. It's something that I think we often forget about.
So Dawn says, keep in mind,
for dogs in particular, it can be especially comforting to have something that smells like home. So you want to bring along a toy or two, definitely enough food, a water bowl so you can provide water to them, and making sure you have their vaccine records and enough medication.
Yours and the dogs.
And to keep in mind, if you plan to eat in the car, they're going to be right there asking for that food too. So you might want to plan, some quick snacks right outside of the car because you don't want to leave your pet in the car without the air conditioning on unaccompanied because it can get crazy hot in there.
Also, if your dog tends to get sick at its stomach from being in the car, a moving car, or in a new place.
And if it's a matter of just nausea and vomiting, perhaps withholding their food before they travel is totally okay. You always want to make sure they have access to water, but it's totally fine to not feed them the morning of the trip and make sure that they have an empty stomach, so that can really help with nausea.
I'm Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Western wildfire activity picked up in the month of July, but the rapid increase in fire complexes were months in the making. Rod Bain has more.
Current wildfire activity in the western U.S. has been 2 years in the making, according to USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey.
Let's take it all the way back to the winter of 2022-23. That was one of the wettest western winter wet seasons that we have ever seen, all the way from the Mexican border to the Canadian border, everywhere in between. Incredibly wet and snowy. And in fact, it was just so wet that we never really dried out that much in the summer months, even though it was climatologically dry as we moved through the summer of 2023.
That resulted last summer and fall in the lowest annual wildfire acreage recorded in the 21st century. Another wet winter was recorded in the West this past winter as well.
However, things have had an opportunity to dry out. This year, we got into a significant heat wave starting in June and peaking in early July.
And significant brush growth out west due to the above average wet conditions of the past 2 winters.
Fine fuel growth that is now curing cured and dried out during the summer. And now we are seeing perfect conditions for any ignition, whether it's a human-caused spark or lightning. And we've seen plenty of instances of both in recent weeks. Those fires can really take off.
Also, weather conditions in July have been ideal for supporting wildfire activity in the western U.S.
Current weather conditions, which includes hot and dry weather, and that can be an added problem when you have low humidity levels and high winds. So for a lot of these California and northwestern wildfires, it's kind of the perfect storm.
The results regarding acreage burned by wildfire so far in the total U.S. as July 2024 was ending.
We are just right around 4 million acres burned in the United States. That's not particularly high historically. We've actually seen annual wildfire acreage totals topping 10 million acres 3 times.
Yet fire activity the past few weeks has been hot and dangerous, according to Rippey.
In late July, we were seeing almost 100 active large wildfires in the western United States. Those 96 active wildfires collectively have burned about 2 million acres. And there's no sign of that changing, with new fires being started all the time, unfortunately by human activity and also by lightning strikes.
As of July's end, more than 25,000 fire personnel were involved in combating the active and contained wildfire complexes. Now for weather conditions in the first few days of August.
As we head through this week and beyond, it looks like the extreme heat is returning to the west. That could be accompanied at times by dry lightning strikes, gusty winds, and extremely low humidity levels that could promote new wildfire activity and expansion of existing fires. So we are nowhere near done with this. We're looking at least several more weeks in the Northwest and longer than that as you move southward into California before we can put this behind us.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
This is the AgNet News Hour. We will be back in just a moment with more agriculture news. Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Cindy Zimmerman.
The Renewable Fuels Association held its Board of Directors meeting in Washington, D.C. this past week. An historic week to be in the nation's capital with a lot happening, and it was a very busy and productive meeting for RFA. I'm talking with RFA President and CEO Jeff Cooper right now. And Jeff, it looks like you had a lot of meetings in D.C. Tell us about some of the folks you were able to meet with.
Well, we had our entire board of directors in town and actually had some guests attending this meeting as well. And so we had our normal board meeting and conducted some association business. And then we sent all of our members up to the Hill to go meet with their elected officials and go meet with members of Congress that may not represent their state or district, but places where we want to continue educating folks about the benefits of ethanol and renewable fuels and getting them up to speed on some of our current policy and regulatory priorities. So our group did more than 50 meetings on Capitol Hill. Again, both Senate and House members, staff for a lot of those members of Congress, but a lot of the members themselves as well. And again, gives us a great chance, gives our industry a great chance to, number one, thank those members of Congress who we know are fighting the good fight every day for us in the renewable fuels industry, but also, again, to answer their questions about what we're seeing in the marketplace and in the industry today, and really stress our policy and regulatory priorities and needs. So in addition to meeting with all those members of Congress, we had the opportunity to meet directly with EPA Administrator Michael Regan. He came and spoke to our board on Tuesday morning, and we had a great conversation with him. We were able to express our thanks and gratitude to him for all the great work that EPA has done on behalf of renewable fuels and the RFS in particular, E15 emergency waivers, and had just a great conversation about what we'd like to see moving forward with the renewable fuel standard and some other issues that EPA is engaged on. We also had a opportunity to visit with the Deputy Secretary from USDA, Deputy Secretary Torres Small, and that was a timely conversation because USDA currently has a request for information out that actually the deadline for submitting responses was just yesterday, and that pertains to how do we do climate smart agriculture commodities in the context of tax credits like the 45Z credit. How do we track and manage and verify and validate, what is happening on the farm with regard to lower carbon farming practices? And then how do we quantify the greenhouse gas benefits of those practices? And then how do we transfer those benefits into the carbon intensity score of ethanol or other renewable fuels for the purposes of these tax credits? So very complex issues, very technical issues. And we had a great chance and a great dialogue with Deputy Secretary Torres Small on that issue, and gave her plenty of feedback from the industry and answered some of her questions and got good, great information from her on kind of where the department is headed with some of this. So overall, lots of meetings this week, lots of great discussions, lots of energy. And at the same time, like you said, it was an interesting week to be in D.C. We had Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking on Wednesday morning to a joint session of Congress. Luckily, we had sort of wrapped up our fly-in by that time, and we're largely done with our meeting, so it didn't cause a lot of interference. But it was tricky getting around town on Wednesday, I'll tell you that.
I'm sure it was.
You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. We continue now with Cindy Zimmerman.
Well, you mentioned the climate smart farming input to USDA, and obviously sustainable aviation fuel, the 45Z tax credit was probably a big topic of discussion with at least the administration officials that you had a chance to talk to. But tell us about what RFA, what your input was to USDA regarding how to keep track of and report climate smart farming practices.
Yeah, and again, those comments were due just last night, so we got those filed. And that largely was a conversation that we had with the administration and USDA in particular. But we also, made sure we were talking about this issue with all of those members of Congress as well. And you may have seen that while we were in town, there was a letter from 52 members of both the Senate and House, bipartisan, bicameral letter that went to the administration that basically said, we got to get proposed rules out on 45Z. This tax credit is supposed to go live on January 1st of 2025, according to the law. And we don't even have a proposed rule out from the Treasury yet to react to. So, again, perfect timing for that letter from the Hill. But much of our feedback to USDA around climate smart agriculture and how to track and verify and validate and manage these supply chains has to do with the use of a chain of custody model called book and claim. And basically what we are advocating for is, look, if there is a requirement under 45Z or any, the SAF tax credit or any other program where climate smart attributes, low carbon farming attributes have to remain tightly connected or coupled to the physical bushels of corn or soybeans or whatever other crop we're talking about, this probably isn't going to work very well. If we're talking about, essentially identity preservation or barcoding corn kernels from the farm to their final end use at a biorefinery, this is going to be very complex and difficult, and we're probably not going to see many farmers or biorefineries, enter into this brave new world. So what we've been saying a better approach would be is a book and claim system where the farmer can prove that he used climate smart ag practices, whether that's no-till or cover crops or lower fertilizer intensity or whatever it might be. He can prove that to a third-party validator. They can certify that he did the things he said he was going to do. And then those environmental attributes, that certification, can be decoupled from the physical grain bushel. And that corn can continue to flow where it should. It should continue to go to where the market says it should go based on price and based on logistics and geography. And then if the ethanol producer wants to claim those lower carbon farming practices and the benefit of that in their CI score, they can purchase that certificate, that decoupled certificate from the farmer who practiced those lower carbon practices. Again, regardless of geography, and you could have a farmer in Georgia selling a climate smart certificate to an ethanol producer in Minnesota, and then that ethanol producer gets to claim the benefit of that CI reduction in their CI score. So that's what we've been pushing for. We think that sort of program is what would allow climate smart agriculture to really scale broadly and quickly. And it really empowers farmers. It puts farmers in the driver's seat to monetize their low carbon farming practices and the sustainable things they're doing on the farm. And it allows farmers across the country to participate. You don't have to be, right next door to an ethanol plant to participate if this is the sort of system that USDA develops. So that's what we were pushing for. And again, it gets a bit wonky and in the weeds and technical, but we are convinced that the only way climate smart ag and low carbon farming practices are going to find their way into this biofuels opportunity and 45Z and everything else we're talking about is through this kind of decoupled book and claim approach.
What about as far as legislation is concerned? We still don't have a farm bill, for one thing. We had a year-round E15 bill that doesn't seem to be moving it much at this point. And we saw the House of Representatives cancel their last couple of days of the session this month. The question really is, do you think we'll get anything legislative done before the end of the year at this point?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, the House decided kind of midweek while we were there that they're pulling the plug on coming back next week. So I think for all intents and purposes, the August recess has sort of begun. I think there's a few little things that are going to get cleaned up and finished up early next week. But then you're going to have, members of Congress back home in their states and districts for the next month. And then, of course, we've got the presidential campaign and the elections in November. So members of Congress who were up for re-election are going to be campaigning as well. And so we don't expect much getting done legislatively between now and election day. There are, you mentioned the Farm Bill. We think there's very likely to be a straight 1-year extension of the existing program that happens, hopefully sometime in September before the existing Farm Bill expires. And, beyond that, I think we're actually looking at lame duck before there's any opportunity for movement on anything else. And we did talk a lot about the need for legislation on year-round E15. Again, I think there's broad support, bipartisan support for getting something done ahead of next summer to allow for year-round sales of E15 nationwide. But the challenge is finding a vehicle, finding a way to move that kind of legislation with the days that are left on the legislative calendar. And again, as we look between now and the end of the year, it appears to us that really the only shot, the best shot we would have would be during lame duck when there might be, appropriations and other things moving where the can has been kicked, into the lame duck session. So that's kind of what we're keeping our eyes on. And we obviously are also looking ahead to a new Congress in the new year and starting to strategize for that as well.
That's today's top agriculture news. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. Thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West online at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also find our broadcast team of Brian German and Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.